All right, welcome back. Jury selection for the Derek Chauvin murder trial continues as we speak. You have a live look at the judge right here. This as Hennepin County District Judge Peter Cahill has reinstated the third-degree murder charge against Chauvin. This according to the Minnesota legislature website. Third-degree murder is defined in two ways. Quote, the suspect without intent to affect the death of any person causes the death of another by perpetuating an act of enmity, dangerous to others, and evincing a deprived mind without regard for human life. Very technical terms here. Without intent, this is also another definition here. Without intent to cause death, proximity causes the death of a human being. We'll get into these meanings in much more detail coming up. We also have some updates now on the jury selection. 5 jurors have been selected so far. Also, Chauvin was recorded last summer, as we all saw, kneeling on the neck of George Floyd for several minutes during the arrest. Floyd, of course, was pronounced dead on the scene. Now, Chauvin's attorney will argue that Floyd's death was due to the drugs in his system, methamphetamines and opioids. Those were all present in the autopsy report. But there's another element of this trial, too, that we have to talk about, and that's the city of Minneapolis. The city and eventually the nation was torn apart in the aftermath of George Floyd's death last summer. Right now, though, we've already seen another autonomous zone set up near the site where George Floyd was killed. They're calling this George Floyd Square. Police are not allowed inside this autonomous zone, and one man has already been shot and killed. Police say the victim and suspect had an argument, but of course the police are not allowed inside the autonomous zone where George Floyd was killed, so they couldn't do anything about it effectively. Let's talk now more about this trial and what's ahead, and welcome in Harvard Law Professor Emeritus and Newsmax contributor and analyst Alan Dershowitz. Also joining us today is the host of the Rubin Report on YouTube, Dave Rubin, author of the book, Don't Burn This Book, Thinking for Yourself in an Age of Unreason. All right, Professor Dershowitz, first to you. We have the third-degree murder charge now back in. Kind of walk us through what this means for the case and why it was out and now back in.
It's back in because the appellate courts came up with a new decision between the time it was taken out and now, redefining what third-degree murder means. The government is going to have to come up with a theory, whether it's under Part 1 or Part 2. I don't see any theory under which they could justify third-degree murder on the claim that it endangered the lives of others. That's the primary definition of third-degree murder. The other definition really makes it in many respects parallel to second-degree murder. So I think there's a lot of good lawyering to be done here. A bill of particulars request asking them to specify which provision of third-degree murder they're relying on, an argument that it's duplicitous. If it's the second provision, it duplicates second-degree murder. If it's the first provision, what's the evidence that anybody else was ever in danger? It's not like shooting. When you shoot at somebody, there's always the possibility the bullet will ricochet and hit somebody else. But when you do what the horrible thing that was done here, knee on the neck, there's only one person who is in danger, and that is the ultimate victim. This is going to be a very, very hard case to try fairly. It's going to be a hard case to get fair jurors, and the judge has to make sure that he gives proper instructions. Otherwise, there's a substantial chance of appellate reversal, either in the state court or in a federal court based on violations of constitutional rights. I think everybody has an interest in making this a fair trial, so that everybody understands that the results were not dictated by the crowds on either side. Justice has to not only be done, but it has to be seen to be done in this case.
There's a perception issue here, too, that's not just in this case, but in a lot of cases, Dave, too, where it seems like sometimes the public will only accept a murder charge or a murder conviction. Sometimes the charges come after the fact and people say, that's not enough. But does it appear to you, Dave, like the charging here is somewhat designed towards that end, you know, fulfilling the needs of the community as opposed to actually pursuing justice in this case?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, I'll defer to Professor Dershowitz on the specifics around the legality of the third-degree murder charge. But in essence, you're making a great point here that Attorney General Keith Ellison, he's ramping up a charge that sounds like it will be very hard to convict on. And let's not forget, you know, Keith Ellison, this is a guy who posted a picture with an Antifa book, you know, basically has endorsed Antifa. He's the Attorney General, and yet there's a place right now in Minnesota that police cannot go. Is that legal? I mean,
and his son is leading the charge for defunding the police from within the Minneapolis City Council. You know, Professor Dershowitz.
Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
Well, you remember, so in essence, they're ramping up the idea that they're going to charge him in a way that will not be legally sound. And at some level, some of these people do want the riots and these, these autonomous zones that are completely lawless.
You know, Professor Dershowitz, too, and I'll let you weigh in on that. But the thing that I think we have to keep in mind here, because the video is so, it affects everyone who watches it, but we still have to present the burden is on the state to prove that he was guilty here, and there's no presumption of innocence, really, with a lot of these public officials when it comes to this case.
Well, certainly not with Keith Ellison. Let's remember his history. He was a Farrakhan guy, and he supported Farrakhan, who was a basic bigot, an anti-Semite, anti-gay, anti-everything. And Keith Ellison was his guy. People may remember that I threatened to quit the Democratic Party, which I've been a member of since the 1950s, if Keith Ellison was elected to be the chairman, and he was elected to be co-chairman, not chairman. So I didn't quit. But he's not a good person, Keith Ellison. He's a very dangerous man. I don't trust him to even want to do justice in this case. I don't know anything about the judge, but it's the judge's primary responsibility to make sure that this is not a case that's controlled by the mob. Right. The reason why I think they introduced third-degree murder is to give them belt and suspenders, to give them a possibility of getting a compromise verdict. If you get a jury that's hung on second-degree murder, then maybe they'll compromise on third-degree murder. Then the judge can still put them away for many, many, many years. But that is an invitation to reversible error if they overcharged or mischarged. That's what happened in some of these other cases, like the one in Florida, the Martin case in Florida, where the charge was wrong, and that resulted in an acquittal. So, when you play to the mob, you often endanger the possibility of getting a verdict that will be upheld by the courts.
Yeah, and we saw this in Ferguson, Missouri. It's happened so many times with the Atlanta case, too, with the shooting there with the detective. The other thing, too, Dave, I'll get back to you in 1 second, but I just want to follow up with Professor Dershowitz about this. Mm-hmm. When you have an alleged victim here, like George Floyd, we know the defense is going to talk about the amphetamines, the opioids in his system, the fentanyl, his congenitive heart problems, and some of the other issues with his lungs. How big of a component is this in the case? Because this was never talked about in the initial moments when we were seeing all the riots. There's been no management of expectations, Professor Dershowitz, of the public's perceptions here. So, these are serious hurdles that the prosecution is going to have to get over.
No question. They have to prove that the knee on the neck caused. Now, cause doesn't mean was the only cause. There's what's called the eggshell skull doctrine. Mostly it's in torts, but it sometimes applies in criminal law. You take your victim as you found him, but it goes to intentionality. Look, the video is horrible, and the video does undercut the presumption of innocence. You see that video, you say to yourself, this guy is clearly guilty of doing something wrong. And then we have to figure out what it is he did wrong. Nobody would ever normalize the kind of conduct we saw on the videotape. Right. But if death was not caused directly, and if he didn't believe that putting his knee on the neck of a normal, healthy person would cause death, but the death resulted from something unanticipated, that's something the jury can take into account. And you're right about raised expectations. If there's an acquittal here, let's remember our system. Better 10 guilty go free than one innocent be wrongly confined. This is a gray area case, and so one can't predict the outcome of this case.
Dave, let's also talk, too, about the impact this case is already having on the city of Minneapolis. We talked about this with the autonomous zone. George Floyd has been held up as a patron saint. So many decisions have been made. His mural is everywhere. But again, we're going to see a lot of this information come out about him that is negative. Where do you see the city of Minneapolis going from here?
Yeah, well, look, we have a legal case and I would say a cultural case. So we've just dissected the legal case, and the fact that they're going for this third-degree murder charge, I think, is setting up what will become the cultural case, which is fairly obvious that unless he gets a full conviction on all accounts, there is going to be massive riots. Like that to me is a foregone conclusion. To the idea that we allow certain people to select certain areas in certain cities where police can no longer go, and the laws of the United States or of that particular state or city no longer apply, is already a concession that is so extraordinary that, of course, what the people want, what the Antifa people, the Black Lives Matter people, and I would say a lot of the progressive politicians, including Keith Ellison, and this is a really dangerous idea, that they want more unrest. Mm-hmm. So I think he's intentionally going with this high charge, and short of a full conviction, and I think whatever that means, even if there was a full conviction, they would still find a way to go ahead with the violence they have planned, because that's part of the battle right now. It's not just a legal battle, it's a cultural battle.
Yeah. That's why there should be a change of venue. This case should not be tried in a large city in Minnesota. This case should be tried in a rural area where there is no personal fear that there will be danger or repercussions, because the last thing you want any juror to think is, I don't want my family hurt. And if I come and vote for an acquittal, this could affect me and my family and my community. Whereas if I vote to convict, everybody's going to be safe, everybody's going to be fine. That cannot affect a juror's perception if the Constitution is to be followed. And so a change of venue, I don't know whether they're thinking about anonymous jurors in this case. That happens in some cases. There are lots of techniques that can be used to reduce the prejudicial impact. Because look, this is the most important crime, put aside capital, whether, all that, but the most important murder in modern memory. No murder, no killing, let's use the word killing and be neutral, no death of a person has ever singularly produced more change, not only in Minnesota, not only in the United States, but around the world. The death of this man changed what's going on around the world. It is a major cultural, political, historical event. And for a judge to ignore that would be to abdicate his responsibility. He has to assure justice under circumstances where it's going to be very difficult to get justice done here.
In both a micro and
John,
macro
can I
sense.
just say one other thing?
One more thing, David, and I'll let you talk. One more on a micro and macro sense too. Here, they called for defunding the police as a result of this, and right now the Hennepin County Courthouse is surrounded by National Guard and surrounded by razor wire, and this is the effect that happens. They want to defund the police, but what you get in return is the National Guard to fill the void. Dave, go ahead.
Well, because of what Professor Dershowitz just said there, that's the point, that if they had gone for the first degree and second degree, virtually everybody across the political spectrum and all over the world would have said justice was done here if he was convicted of those two things. But now by taking this leap, they're setting us up for further destruction. They're setting us up for further upheaval and everything else. And that really is the danger here. And again, I kind of think that that's sort of what Keith Ellison, as the Attorney General, wants, that he is setting us up for that situation. Otherwise, perhaps he would be doing his job and they would be going into that autonomous zone and closing it right now. Why is it open?
Because the only reason it's open is because it's politically unpopular to close it down. That's the only conclusion we can reach here. This has been fascinating, guys, and let's do it again, because there's a lot of issues here. It's kind of sobering to hear Professor Dershowitz say this is the most important killing or murder case that he can remember. That's a big statement. Professor Dershowitz, thank you for that. Dave, great to see you as always. We'll see you on YouTube as well. We'll talk soon.
Hi, Emma Reckenberg here. If you like this video, there's a whole lot more to see on Newsmax TV. You can watch for free right here on our YouTube live stream and be the first one here each time our experts break down real news. Just hit that subscribe button, ring the bell icon, and stay with us on America's fastest growing cable news channel, Newsmax TV.